Good morning, Cambridge Park High School, and welcome to Remembrance Day 2020. Today is a very special day in our nation's short history as we take a moment to pause and reflect on the sacrifices made by all servicemen and women since World War I. So, what is Remembrance Day? For some of you, this might be your first Remembrance Day, and you might be not fully aware of what its true meaning is for Australians. So today is a day of reflection for Australian citizens, and we reflect on a really powerful moment in our history. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, the armistice was declared and World War I was officially over. This day was really special across the world as it saw the end of one of the first global scale wars that destroyed the lives of so many and the livelihoods of so many others. So it was at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918 that the guns fell silent across the world. People were rejoicing and celebrating the fact that World War I had finally come to an end and very hopeful that their loved ones would return home safely. However, this wasn't the case for everyone. Some people did return, but not so safely. They suffered a range of different injuries from the war, and some didn't return at all. And that's what Remembrance Day is really about, reflecting on the ultimate sacrifice of those soldiers who did not return at all to Australia. So at Cambridge Park High School, what will we be doing this Remembrance Day? So as a school, we will be partaking in this universal lesson in an effort to remember the fallen soldiers, sailors and airmen that have been involved in every conflict since World War I. We will also be taking the time to understand the importance of Remembrance Day and the significance of it to those Australian citizens who value the sacrifices that were made by all servicemen and women, and especially those who have a connection to that. A lot of the people in our community have a connection to someone who has fought in a war in one capacity or another, and some even have a connection to those who did not return safely to Australia. After we do the universal lesson, we will be going down to the quad to listen to the poem In Flanders Field. We'll also hear the ode, which you may have heard before, and then the last post will be played. When we listen to the last post, you are urged to really reflect on what soldiers would have regularly heard in the field. The last post to them really symbolised the beginning of each day, and now as the years have progressed, it symbolises the final resting place for soldiers. Once we listen to the last post, we will have a minute's silence, and in that minute, we also reflect on those sacrifices and try to really put ourselves in the places of those soldiers and those sailors and the airmen who were so brave and put everything on the line for the safety of Australia. Whilst we take this time to reflect on the sacrifices of those who fought overseas, I think it's also important that we reflect on the sacrifices of those who stayed home and the efforts that they made to contribute to the safe passage and safe return of our soldiers. Now we'll have a look at what Remembrance Day means to Australia. So for over 100 years now, as Australians, we've been taking the time on the 11th of November to pause and reflect on all sacrifices that occurred during World War I. So 416,809 servicemen who enlisted and were prepared to sacrifice their lives were sent overseas to defend Australia and the British Empire in World War I. Many of them went to Egypt to train, some fought on the Western Front, and their efforts did not go unnoticed. Australians are infamous for the efforts that they made on the Western Front, and still today in France, there are small villages that fly the Australian flag. 62,000 of those servicemen were killed during World War I. That means that the families, the loved ones of those 62,000 men did not see the safe return of their family members, of their husbands, their sons, their cousins, their brothers. They did not see them come home safely at all. 156,000 of those nearly 500,000 soldiers were wounded, gassed, or taken prisoner during their time in World War I. And what is really interesting is that some of those who served were as young as 17. I know that some of you are 17 yourselves who are listening to this, and I think that it is really powerful if you reflect on your own lives and think about marching off into the unknown to serve for your country, to protect the citizens of Australia. And they did that for complete strangers. They would have done that for their families, for the ones that they loved and really cared for, but they still did that for complete strangers and for the safety of our nation as a whole. Now, some of you may know that these men originally enlisted because they didn't really have an understanding of what war was. They didn't really understand the scale at which they would be fighting, the things they would be coming up against, but rather they saw it as an opportunity to see the world, to make new friends, and to go on an adventure. And this didn't really turn into an adventure for a lot of them. The atrocities that they saw during this time, some of them brought home with them, and it changed them forever. Others had to watch their mates die, others had to watch their mates struggle, and others had to do things that they probably never thought that they would do in their lifetime, in an effort to keep themselves and their mates safe. World War I was also the birthplace of the Anzac and the legend of the Anzac. Our efforts in World War I made us infamous. It showed that we were a nation prepared to defend ourselves and to come to the call of the Empire, the British Empire, in an effort to maintain a sense of world peace. And Australian soldiers, Australian diggers, did that well. They were renowned for their ingenuity, for their bravery, and their willingness to never back down. And that Anzac spirit has lived on throughout the decades and is something that a lot of Australians possess even to this day, and something that we should be really proud of. Now, as you may have already seen, and as you will see when you go down to the assembly, a lot of the teachers around the school and the office staff and some of the students will be wearing a red poppy. And I think it's really important that we discuss the purpose of the poppy. So during World War I, red poppies were among the first plants that sprouted on the battlefields and rear areas of Belgium and northern France. And that is where the Western Front is situated, and that is where nearly 250,000 Australians dedicated their efforts to protecting the front against the German advance, and were very successful in warding off German troops. Now, the vivid red of the poppies reminded many people of the soil being drenched with the soldiers' blood. Now, wearing a poppy signifies the respect that you have for the bloodshed, the respect that you have for the ultimate sacrifice of these men overseas. Think about it. They were in a foreign country protecting someone else's land, but they understood the repercussions of what would happen if they didn't. They knew that Germany would advance and change the face of the world as we know it today. This actually happened again in World War II, and the Allied forces, which includes Australian and New Zealand forces, were again successful in warding off Germany and their plans to change the face of the world and world order. And each time they made the ultimate sacrifice, they lost men and women who were prepared to put everything on the line for the safety of not just their countrymen, but all citizens around our world. So looking deeper into where the symbol of the poppy came from, it originated from the poem written by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who was a Canadian surgeon for an Allied artillery unit. he noticed just near Belgium a cluster of poppies that had sprung in the spring, and they sprung out of broken ground where he knew that there was a lot of bloodshed. He knew that there was a very significant battle earlier that year, and he was really struck by the vivid redness of the poppies and how bright and beautiful they were, and how they'd come out of something so broken and destructed. So he wrote the poem in Flanders Fields, and we're going to hear this at the assembly shortly. Now, what happened was a woman named Moina Michael, she read the poem in Flanders Field, and she read it just 2 days before the armistice, so 2 days before the 11th of November in 1918. She then decided, with the inspiration from that poem, to make silk poppies, which she sold in an effort to raise money to support those veterans who were returning from World War I. Ever since, poppies have been a symbol and something that have been sold on Remembrance Day every year in an effort to raise money for veterans across the Allied forces. And it's something we still practice today. You might see them down at your local RSL, or sometimes Woolworths will sell the poppies in an effort to raise money for the Poppy Foundation. And the money that they raise goes to supporting veterans who come back with significant injuries or mental health issues due to the nature of their job as soldiers. Now, in an effort to show our support for our local soldiers and local veterans, we are going to write a postcard to them. Now, our school has a very special connection with St Mary's RSL, and what we've decided to do today is to write the members of St Mary's RSL who have fought in all types of conflicts. We're going to write them a postcard and send them some gratitude and support on this special day. Earlier this year, when we had Anzac Day, they were unable to get together and commemorate their fallen mates, which is a tradition for them, something really special for them. And that was due to COVID. So I think if we can take the time to sincerely show them our support and our gratitude to what they have done and what they continue to do, that would be something really special and meaningful for the veterans. So what I just want to remind you of is, while you're writing these, I want you to really dig deep and reflect. I want you to think about family members that you may have who have given all types of sacrifices to join the Australian Defence Force. If not, think about yourself in that position. Think about what you would want to hear if you were to make an effort to protect our nation's safety. Really, what you need to think about doing is just showing them your thanks. And I think being respectful and doing this in a really sincere way, our gratitude would really be felt by the veterans at St Mary's RSL. This is a really unique opportunity. This is not something that we can do every day. And I think if we really take the time to do this sincerely, we'll have a lasting impact on their lives and on their Remembrance Day for 2020. So I want you to take the time now to choose a postcard and write down a short message of gratitude and thanks. I will then be sending them over to St Mary's, and I know that they'll eagerly be awaiting them. As students are completing their postcard writing task, could you please pause this video and start playing it again at 10:35 so that students can hear the instructions for the assembly. Now that it's nearly 11 a.m, we'll begin packing up our things. Please give your postcard to the classroom teacher. I will be collecting these to send over to St Mary's RSL. Once you have packed up, you need to be walking down to the quad and standing in roll call lines. It's really important that you do this as quickly as possible, as we need to adhere to a strict timeline so that the last post will be played at 11 a.m, just as it was on Armistice Day in 1918. Firstly, in the assembly, we will listen quietly to the poem In Flanders Field. The poem will then be followed by the last post and the rouse. Straight after the last post, it's really important that you remember this, we will stand in complete silence for a minute, and we will remember and reflect on the sacrifices made by all servicemen and women since World War I, and the freedom and the safety that we have today because of their efforts overseas. Then the rouse will play after our minute's silence, and then you will be dismissed for recess. I just want to take the time now to thank everyone for their cooperation, and thank you all for being really respectful and on your best behaviour as we honour and reflect all of those soldiers, those sailors and those airmen who have made the ultimate sacrifice and given their lives for the safety of our own, lest we forget.